Hi, and welcome to another episode of Heroes and Villains of Warmachine. And I'm Chris from Darker Days Radio, and this is part of our Dark Iron series that covers Warmachine and Iron Kingdom's content. So today we're looking at the character of Allison Jakes, who comes in this box here for the Gravediggers. So I have unboxed this already and glued everything together, but in here we get Allison Jakes and some commandos for the Gravediggers. We get her character Warjack, which is called a Beaker. We get another Warjack for airdropping, and we get an Ogren character called Argo Brock. But less of that, more onto the lore. So, who is Allison Jakes? So, Allison Jakes has been an interesting character for Warmachine because she first actually appears not in the war game, not in the RPG, but through the computer game Warmachine Tactics that came out a few years ago through Kickstarter. I played it a bit. It was a essentially kind of like an XCOM kind of approach to Warmachine as a computer game. So turn-based system, grid-based system for how you move things around, and essentially it rolls the dice for you. You get the idea. But let's get into who Allison Jakes is. So Allison Jakes is now a colonel of the Gravediggers and leads a company of them. And she has moved through the ranks, having to deal with both facing Kador during her initial training years as a journeyman warcaster and dealing with the death of her mentor, Commander Sturgis. So Jakes is quite a nimble fighter. She currently uses, or has always used, dual swords. That has changed over time. Before she would use dual swords, and now she makes use of these kind of sword pistol combos. So she has blades underneath the barrel of her pistols, allowing her to fight both at range and in close combat. And this is her favoured way of fighting, though. She was discovered early as she came into her magical kind of, bloomed into her magical kind of proficiency. Was taken to train at the Strategic Academy in Caspia, and part of her training was slightly different, as it was found that she was actually a competent duelist, and so was trained in those ways. Dueling being something that was really kept for the nobility within Signar and in the military. So as nobles joined, even if they weren't warcasters, joined the Strategic Academy for their own training, they would be taught the art of dueling. This was also passed on to Allison Jakes. An interesting point is that while she was a competent fighter initially and was able to bind with her equipment, as warcasters do, she had less initial ability with her warjacks. She wanted to use them as precision weapons that would match the fluidity of her combat prowess, though of course warjacks are not that. They are much more brutal, more hammers, more obvious in their usage. And so part of her training under Sturgis was to come to understand how to use her warjacks on the field of battle in a way that complemented her style of fighting while not being as precise as she would like. So her first tour of duty as a journeyman warcaster was during the Thornwood War of 608 AR, and this would lead to encounters with Kador in the Thornwood, and she would come face to face with Ursus the Butcher, who, as we've seen in the previous series, was a member of Kador and is now a member of the Orgoth Sea Raiders. And it was up against Ursus that Sturgis, her mentor, was slain, and to make matters worse, while she was able to, eventually get some, was able to free Sturgis's soul and set things right. Sturgis, for a time, was under the thrall of Crix. He was reanimated, his mind and soul corrupted by necromancers, and he was put to work for the forces of the Nightmare Empire. Her eventually her battles with Sturgis would come to a conclusion when she would be trapped inside an Orgoth temple, of which there are a number within the Thornwood, and would come face to face with her former mentor. Now, because of the loss of Sturgis and various other actions during the Thornwood battles, Jakes was initially fearful that she would be court-martialed, but all charges were dropped against her, and she was promoted as she clearly had excelled under extreme conditions and was promoted through the ranks. She also had recovered Sturgis's weapon and refashioned it. So that was a double-bladed staff, and so those blades were removed and now became her own dueling swords to make use of in battle. So now a captain, Jakes was given over to Anson Hitch to lead the 13th Brigade, and initially, while she found fighting with him and working under his command grating, and found him quite blunt and less of a precise fighter than she would like, they eventually found that each other complemented their fighting styles, whereas Anson looked at the larger picture and used his forces as an anvil against which to smash the enemy forces. He would make use of Jakes, and Jakes obviously accepted this role, to be leading, surgical strikes with trenches against the enemy. This partnership carried on through during the wars against Kador and eventually against the Protectorate of Menoth, as they fought to help liberate Lael. And then eventually Jakes would leave his command in 611 AR as she was promoted to be a major, and she transferred to the 58th Trencher Brigade and would lead the first company of the 35th Battalion, known as the Furious First. There, she learnt more from the sergeant of the company, learnt more of the trencher way of war, and in return, she taught them what she knew about fighting particular forces, in particular the Crixian armies. And so they worked out training regimes, drills, and various scenarios for war games to make her battalion and make her company as proficient in fighting this enemy as possible. It wasn't an easy time though for Jakes, as eventually she would come face to face with a brand new enemy, and that would be the Infernals. So with the Infernal invasion, Jakes had to deal with the trauma of essentially being turned upon by people who she thought allies, giving her memories of the trauma of having to fight against Sturgis, because of course members within the Signarum forces were actually Infernalists themselves. So most of her battles with her new company were against reclaiming New Larkholm. Then there was the battalion moved on to Serral, fighting there, taking huge losses. And while she had felt unprepared for her role to be commanding this battalion, she was reassured, fortunately, by her sergeants and captains beneath her that she was doing the best job in a terrible situation. The defeat of the Infernals, while obviously involving horrific street fighting through the streets of Serral, eventually led to a call for her forces to head to Hengehold for this big final battle. It was not easy to get there. There were delays. There was little chance to repair weapons, warjacks, and armor, and they had to also deal with her own forces, the entire battalion, and the Trench Brigade being spread across numerous cities or towns and battlefronts. So when she did eventually get to Hengehold, she already found it strewn with bodies and, warjacks and various beasts all slain and destroyed. And she faced again more infernals, and finally, because her weapons had been used and had not had time to be repaired, her swords that she had kept from and reclaimed from Sturgis finally shattered in battle. With the infernal forces at Hengehold defeated and driven away, Jakes had finally a chance to take time to recover and to assess where she was in terms of what she had learnt, her way of fighting, and where she was with respect to commanding her forces, realizing that she had to be more of a leader, couldn't be at the forefront of battle all the time. So, having taken the remains of the blades that had been shattered in battle, she began to then, during this peace after the Battle of Hengehold, she began to renew her training, practicing more of her marksmanship, hence why she now has the remains of Sturgis's blades as slung under pistols to create these kind of pistol blade, gun blade weapons. This allows her to adapt her fighting style, both for close range and for long range, which is more fitting the fact that she has to fight from more of a central position where she commands both her battle group of warjacks and larger armies for her, that is fitting of her rank. With the Infernal Invasion over, of course, there was the Signar reconstruction period and reorganisation of many of the military forces. And this is when Anson Hitch comes back to Allison Jakes, and as now a general, sees to that there be a new 63rd Brigade of Trenchers, and this group would be an elite airborne unit making use of the new airships that Signar had in their arsenal. And so Jakes was elevated to the position of colonel and put in charge of this brigade. The concern was that Jakes would have to adapt again, a new fighting style, new weaponry, new technology. But Hitch, had confidence in her and put her to task of not only just finishing the reorganisation of this brigade, but also recruiting the right warcasters and captains and sergeants and personnel under her command to create a truly rapid fighting force. So she would ultimately recruit people like Buck Hasker and Connor McCoy. And now, with the Orgoth invasion in its fullest, she is once more coming face to face with an enemy she has not seen for a few years, that being Orsus the Butcher. Right, well, that's Allison Jakes in a nutshell. I hope you enjoyed that, and we'll be back with another episode soon. So goodbye for now.